Hello, welcome to Grounded, where we will continue to rely on our shared roots, our civility, and our shared love of community and country to ground us while we engage in honest, reflective conversations about how we have come to find ourselves in one of the most divisive and disorienting times in the history of our country. I'd like to start out by saying thank you to all who have expressed interest and support for the show, and a special thank you for those of you watching for the first time. I'd also like to address the question of my qualifications for discussing such things as national politics, economic theories, systems theory, personal growth, neuroscience, growth mindset, psychology, legacy media, social media, the plague of misinformation, corporate dominance over our society and our foreign policy, patriotism, and what we value as Americans, environmental issues, and reliable sources of information. The truth is, I have no more than anyone watching. My intention is not to teach. My hope is for Grounded to create an open dialogue with members of our community on issues that affect us all on a daily basis. Issues that affect us where we live together, but are definitely not generated here, where we live and shop and eat and walk and celebrate and mourn together, as a way to figure things out together and hopefully land on verifiable facts when we have conflicting information. Thankfully, I still have the freedom to do this, and so do you. I do believe the future of our democracy depends on it. I'm not here to try to offend anyone or own anyone, but I am here to challenge my community to think about and discuss these things. The same community that has been there for me at every point in my life to look at our current situation with a different lens, with different mental models and constructs that might allow us all to see things differently. Here, I'll lean on Einstein, and remember he said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Grounded is designed to proceed in a very intentional way, at a very intentional pace, a way that prioritizes civility, respect, and an open mind at a pace where facts can be verified with credible sources. I intend to do the following: deal in verifiable facts, offer a few of my own opinions, and ask a lot of questions. I would like to offer some new ways of looking at old problems and maybe some old ways of looking at new ones. Based on the 2024 presidential election results in Whitman, 50% of the voters did not want Trump to be president again, and even 45% of Hanson voters rejected Trump. This is by no definition a mandate from the voters of our community. Therefore, I want to hear from our elected officials on the concerns the 45 to 50% of us have after the first 2 weeks of the new administration. Whether we are on the right or on the left, Republicans, Democrats, or independents, we do share a common threat to our country and all our freedoms. The common enemy is disinformation and the misinformation that is compounded by the speed at which this false information travels and influences the way we see ourselves and the way we see our future. I know we all share the same hopes for our children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews to grow, to be healthy, and maintain and enjoy all the rights and freedoms provided to us through our Constitution and our rule of law. But yet, we can't seem to agree on basic fundamental facts. Disinformation that is either constructed, embellished, or outright created by private corporations and foreign actors who want to be able to predict and in turn control us as much as they can to serve their interests and power and wealth, has us where we are today, 2 weeks into the second Trump administration. Let's recap the first 2 weeks. Trump has signed illegal executive orders targeting schools, trans kids, and immigrants, launched us into a trade war that will most definitely adversely affect the cost of goods for us, created chaos throughout our government, ordering unlawful spending freezes on things like school lunches, medical research, and college financial aid. A judge has put a halt to that order, and in her decision, Ali Khan faulted the administration for an effort to, quote, run roughshod over a bulwark of the Constitution by interfering with Congress's appropriation of federal funds. The administration's plan, she added, attempted to wrest the power of the purse away from the only branch of government entitled to wield it. She is, of course, referring to the first branch of government, Congress. Here's what the Cato Institute had to say about Trump's Friday Night Massacre, which involved the sacking of a dozen agency or department inspector generals, which violates a current statute enacted in late 2022 by failing to give 30 days notice to Congress before firing an IG. As far as the political norms are concerned, this is bigger than just ignoring a congressional notification requirement. The entire purpose of having IGs is to help expose and stop waste, fraud, abuse, mismanagement, or even criminal conduct, the latter requiring a referral to the Justice Department for action. IGs are supposed to focus on ensuring agency or department adherence to existing laws and regulations. Trump's mass purge of these IGs for no other stated reason than that he can sends a chilling message to the remaining IGs and their staffs, and it provides comfort to those hoping their illicit government activities might not be allowed to slide. And in any would-be whistleblower seeking to expose misconduct by Trump or his appointees is now on notice that doing so at best might be pointless and at worst invite firing or even prosecution for defying Trump. Quote, Trump has also exceeded his authority by ordering a funding freeze on federal grants and loans. Set aside the fact that his White House then sent conflicting messages and that a court blocked his funding freeze. Remember that his first impeachment back in 2019 was for something similar, failing to disperse congressionally authorized aid to Ukraine. So I would like to continue to hear from our elected officials. I would like to hear from our general population. I would love to be convinced our democracy is not in jeopardy of buckling under a lawless president whose candidacy was foundationally based on a verifiable lie. We'll leave a contact link in the description to reach us at the show. We'll also leave links to resources that we've referenced. For our next segment, we're happy to have Justin Evans with us to discuss the book On Freedom by Timothy Snyder. Hello, and welcome to Grounded. In today's segment, we're lucky enough to have Justin Evans join us to discuss Timothy Snyder's book, On Freedom. Justin, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, happy to be here, Chris.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I figured we'd start out by maybe just hearing from you in terms of your background in Whitman and some of the maybe highlights of your youth and how you remember growing up. It's very important for us here at Grounded to remember our roots and like I would say, to try to find some common ground, right?
Yeah.
And things we value and share in Whitman.
So I guess, yeah, and my roots, my parents bought their first house in Abington, I think right around the time they were expecting me. And we lived there when my sister was born. Then we had a younger brother and outgrew the house. So they started looking around, settled on Whitman. I would have been about 7 years old.
Okay.
So moved here. I got to go to the Holt School for 2 years. It shut down, go to Duval. The middle school that we are now getting ready to close. 1 year in the old high school and 3 in the new. So I grew up right in that period of transition for the town.
Yeah.
And loved it. It's funny, graduated from Whitman-Hanson, went on to Northeastern to study mechanical engineering, got into energy systems, worked at a biofuel startup, and now the state as the regulatory authority that oversees natural gas distribution around the state.
Oh, interesting.
So I got involved there right after the Merrimack Valley explosions when they had a need to staff up on people with that kind of background.
Yeah.
So it's been a wild ride, but yeah, my wife grew up in Hanson. We wanted to be close to family, ended up buying a house in Whitman back in 2018, and had our daughter in, she'll be 3 in a couple of months. So really, I know, really, to really summarize it, that's, come full circle.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, you're on the select board.
And I'm on the select board in Whitman. I'm finishing up my 6th year.
Coming up for re-election.
Coming up for re-election in May.
Yeah. And on that note, I can't thank you enough for your service to the community.
Thank you.
So we've been in similar circles for over the last several years, and in terms of our town politics, and I am always impressed with how informed you are, how thoughtful you are in your approach to things, and we're lucky to have you. Really are.
Thanks, and yeah, likewise. I mean, the respect goes both ways there. I served on committees with you, and it really,
yeah. And my earliest memory of you and your wife, I think, was when my wife and her sister were doing community theater.
I think, yeah.
And it might have been Annie, I think.
Yeah, so Annie would have been my first play. I was in the 5th grade.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, right. So you weren't too, you were relatively new to Whitman.
Yep.
Right? And that, I think it was at the Cardinal Spellman Center.
It was the Spellman Center.
Yeah. How about that? So On Freedom, Timothy Snyder. I asked Justin to read this book and to come on and discuss it with me, and I'm looking forward to our discussion here. Little background on Timothy Snyder, and please help me fill in the gaps.
Sure.
He grew up in, I think, rural Ohio, I believe?
Yeah, rural Ohio.
And he's right around my age, I think. He's like 54, I believe. Hearing him describe the period of time when the collapse of the Soviet Union and like the whole Cold War and you know, just all the repercussions that came out of that that we still are dealing with today. I thought was fascinating because it resonated a lot. His recollections of those time periods, and he of course went on to study this stuff quite a bit. He
lived abroad.
Lived abroad
in Soviet history a lot.
Yep, very much so. Yeah, and I think he studied over there, and then I remember him saying in the book that through the time he was looking for a job as a professor in the States, like a period of like 6 years or something, is when he really kind of engrossed himself in the subject of the former Soviet Union and the you know, the way the fallout, if you will. I think, right? Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I just I felt like I could really relate to his perspective, not only in that time period, but where we are today. And he's certainly been someone on the front lines of raising the alarm of tyranny, right, and authoritarianism.
Yeah.
He wrote the book on tyranny as well. I think there's one before this or two before this. Yeah, so I just think he's a professor now at Yale, has been for quite some time. He's very thoughtful historian, philosopher, and this book on freedom is basically a philosophy on freedom itself and all the different aspects of it. Yeah, so he kind of breaks it down. The first value of freedom, I would say, is sovereignty. And I'm curious in that chapter how it hit you when he talked about the Leib and the Körper.
Yeah, and so I thought that was interesting, the sort of sense of self. I don't know if you can give a definition.
As I remember it, and I could probably just...
It's probably easiest to read it.
Right, so a German philosopher, Edith Stein, put her own body forward during the First World War. A graduate student, she took leave to volunteer as a nurse. When she returned to her dissertation, her time with the wounded guided her argument about empathy. Do we not, she says, need the mediation of the body to assure ourselves of the existence of another person? She used the word body, the word she used for body was Leib, L-E-I-B, Leib, which is a German word. And and he goes on to talk about how there's another word for body, and it's Körper, I think is how you say it. Körper. I'm not to speak German. But
I listen to the audiobooks I've got. It's funny,
Right, same. So as far as the Körper goes, it's the word Körper can denote a person's body, but also a foreign body, a heavenly body, the racial body, and other objects that to be subject, and other objects thought to be subject to physical laws. A Körper might be alive, but it need not be. Stein says there can be a Körper without me, but no Leib without me. The word Leib designates a living human body or animal body or a body of an imaginary creature in a story. A Leib is a Körper subject to physical laws, but that is not all it is. It has its own rules and so its own opportunities. A Leib can move. A Leib can feel. A Leib has its own center, impossible to graph precisely in space, which Stein calls a 0 point. We can always see some of our Leib, but we can never see all of it. Our liveliness is shared. When we understand another person as Leib rather than Körper, we see the whole world differently. And that's pretty much really, I think, the gist of it. You know?
Yeah, and that's the bulk of it. It was sort of a, that was, getting to that point in the book was when I realized it was going to be a lot more philosophical than I was expecting.
Right. Yeah.
But it was interesting to separate that, it's not just yourself as an individual, but it's that sense of yourself in the universe, how other things relate to you, how it affects you.
Sure.
Separate from the Körper, which is just the individual object.
Right.
Moving around the world.
Yeah, and I found it particularly interesting for him to hear how he talks about the notion that we come to understand ourselves through others.
Yeah.
Right? When we can see ourselves in others, when we can see how others relate to the same things we need to relate and interact with, That's how we form our values, and that's how we examine ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And where we fit in our community, in our society, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think when he gets into when he gets into these different freedoms, he really stresses the point that they're positive freedoms, right?
Yeah.
And they're not negative freedoms. They're not. He suggests that we make the mistake of hanging on to these negative freedoms that deal with barriers, right?
Yeah. And he made the point that was sort of an American version, understanding of freedom, was that it was this negative. You're free from oppression or from confinement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than free to explore. Yeah.
Yeah. And he specifically challenges libertarians, right?
Yeah.
Because the idea of free speech being the most fundamental of all of our freedoms, right?
Yeah.
And I would certainly say that's. I'm no libertarian, but from the ones I do, they certainly regard that as a very high priority in terms of freedom, right? Free speech. Also, free market, right? And the idea that if the government doesn't interfere, then the free market will solve all our problems, right? And again, he gets into the idea there is no such thing as a free market.
Yeah.
It's actually a myth, right? Because if a government doesn't enforce contracts and property laws and whatnot, the free market dissolves, right?
Yeah, and that was, it hit me. So because I work in utilities, they're regulated monopolies.
Right.
And so government is the thing that keeps it fair.
Yep.
Because otherwise, there's no limit to what an electric or gas company could charge a customer because they're the only game in town. They built the wires and the pipes.
Yeah.
They sell you the energy. So that did really kind of reflect. That one hit me a little more clearly.
Yeah.
On it's if you went full free market on stuff that necessities, things get out of control.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at one point, and I might be getting ahead, but he talks about like when we have this idea that we're born free.
Yeah.
Right. And he challenges that and says, actually, no, nobody's born free. You're born completely dependent on those around us, right?
Yeah.
To help us grow. And he makes a distinction between humans and other mammals, and how because our brain is so much bigger, right? We can't stay in the womb as long as we need to for it to fully form.
Yeah.
So we come out at a very vulnerable state compared to other mammals, right? And so the idea is we're not born free. We're born into an understanding, in a society that has an ideal of what freedom is. And we rely on, our family and our community to help us in our most vulnerable period of our life, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty interesting way to look at our freedom.
Yeah, that is a pretty interesting way, and to take the childhood angle, or even the, I'm trying to think back, maybe it was the Obama campaign to go historic in the 2008 period, was the sort of, we've only had this level of freedom. We're always striving toward more equality, and sort of as putting that American understanding of freedom as a direction rather than a fact.
Yeah.
And so it was that kind of reflected on me. So, the voting rights are progressively, and I think Snyder touches on it, like progressively increasing throughout time. It's not necessarily, the founders didn't give non-property owning, even white men, the right to vote.
Yep.
Not even, women or people of color. It's progressed over time to be that more equal understanding.
Yeah, and funny you should mention that. I don't know if he gets into too much in the book, but it reminds me of the idea that the rights you're referring to are rights of us as people, right?
Yeah.
And we certainly have, African Americans, the suffrage movement for the women, different things like that have required us to go out in the streets and protest and hard-earned rights, whereas corporate rights are always attained silently through the courts, where we don't understand how they're accumulating, and we don't understand the ramifications. Right?
Yeah.
So the fact is the fact that we think of corporations as people legally, and we think of their political funding as free speech, to me, that's something that we should all be looking closely at and considering the ramifications.
Which is, I mean, a fairly recent understanding. It's
Yeah.
20, 25 years of that. Corporations are people, and then
Sure.
even less time for money is speech.
Yeah. So the corporate citizenship, or personhood rather, goes back quite a ways. But it's you're right. I'd say the last 40 years or so.
Okay.
It's really been a concentrated, effort through the corporations, through the courts,
Yeah.
to really exploit, some soft spots in our democracy.
Yeah.
For their benefit and their empowerment. So anyway, that's sidetracked. But in the next chapter, did you have something?
No. Yeah.
This is the next chapter is unpredictability, right? And he talks about how the first chapter is sovereignty. I want to make sure that I get it. Second is unpredictability, and how important that is to our freedom to be unpredictable. And when we become predictable, we are just that much easier to control, right? That to me, I thought that was
that was the takeaway.
Right. And where social media plays into all this, I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I've always been leery. I've never been particularly active on social media, and I think it's one of those things where it's initially thought to be like the what a tool for freedom, right?
Yeah.
You can talk to someone across the world and all that, but then you start to understand, the entities that control it and benefit from it, and the algorithms that are set up in a way not necessarily to provide factual information, but to keep us clicking.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think we've fully grasped the degree to which we are, in fact, already being controlled.
Yeah, the sort of reward system of social media, technology in general. I mean, if you think TikTok, to go into technology discussion, every aspect of TikTok is gathering feedback. And so that's why it's such a good algorithm, and people consider it so dangerous, right? Because it's not just whether you watch a video, like it, share it, but it's how long you spend on that particular video. Do you go back? Do you are you reading the comments, or are you just skipping through? Every individual action is a data point that their algorithm uses to feed you more content, either like it or that it thinks you'll try, and then it will try weird ones out of left field that it's not expecting, just to get that feedback. Continue developing the algorithm and say, Chris is really into food. Maybe he likes animals, and just like kick one in there. And to develop a full study of a predictability. Sort of.
It makes me think of the notion that people really resist the idea that they can be controlled. People, even marketing, right? People don't. They're very unwilling to consider that we are all susceptible to being controlled. It goes against our nature, so to speak, of how we see ourselves as Americans, right? That's why I think this stuff is so important to discuss. And he goes into what he calls these brain hacks, right? And the first brain hack is experimental isolation, right? Getting you alone on your screen. Getting you out of touch, rubbing it up against the bodies of other people, but getting yourself isolated, out of bodily contact with fellow creatures. It generates an artificial loneliness that enables for more brain hacks, for more kinds of manipulation. And it talks about how this comes from experiments, that were done, I think in the 60s or something, maybe, that really, they've been used like Pavlov's dogs, and they talk about having rodents with levers. And then the next brain hack is the intermittent reinforcement, right? Where the people click and click and click and waiting to get that dopamine rush, right? So this is science that and well researched and well applied to for their profit and for our giving up really our unpredictability,
Yeah.
right?
It's a control
For sure.
mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, he talks about how the science of behaviorism, right? This is where all these studies generated from.
Yeah.
Right. So experimental isolation and intermittent reinforcement bring us to our most probable states. That makes us most predictable. Right?
Yeah.
And then, this part here I thought was interesting too in the same section, when he says, when we think with values, we are drawing from the past, but we are not stuck in it. We are considering the present, but we are not sanctifying it. We are orienting toward the future, and we are making it. We like to think of ourselves as reasonable creatures, and sometimes we are. Our individual responsibility is unpredictable, but it arises in unique combinations of facts that we find salient and values that we affirm. Our collective unreasonability is predictable because, unlike values and facts, impulses and lies can be mechanized. Our collective unreasonability has general patterns, which computers trace and amplify. It is not so much that not so much that they outthink us, they unthink us, right?
Yeah.
They unthink us, which, I think it's pretty evident, really, when you think of it in these terms,
Yeah.
what's actually, what role we play in all this, right?
And I think this is where I think this is the section that got really back to the 2016 election and Facebook's, the ability for foreign agents to manipulate Facebook algorithms to maybe not sway an election, but influence, the thinking of Americans.
Yeah, and he talks about, I remember him talking with the Kerpa.
Yeah.
In that, and because we start to see others as not like us.
Yeah.
Right. So when they know what we're afraid of, right?
Yeah.
And they can play into that, it allows us to see others as being barriers to our freedom.
Yeah.
Right. So that again, that's that negative freedom. Right. If
Yeah.
only it weren't for the others,
Yeah.
we'd be more free. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what social media just, perpetuates.
And it's not just so. I mean, that example, the 2016 election, was not the social media company itself. It was users generating. But in the most recent election, you can see that the world's wealthiest man owned one of the largest social media organizations, and it was used to drive messages, to drive his message, and help swing an election. And it was successful.
Yep. And he also warns about what's the term he uses when you don't give up ahead of time? What is that? Do you remember that term?
Yeah, I'm blanking on it
He
too.
basically says, like, don't make it easy for a tyrant.
Right.
Be on guard. Remember what we value. Maybe think of it in different terms. My big thing is, again, I don't pretend to be the smartest guy in the room ever. That's not. I've never been that guy, right? I'm just a guy that wants to be honest and look at things maybe a little differently.
Yeah.
Try to understand things better, right? And I hope that I can engage with our community and members of our community to come and sit down and talk about these pressing issues. The other thing he touches on in terms of the hacks is the confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
And so one form of this unreasonability, he goes on to say, is confirmation bias. This means that we treat information as evidence when it seems to confirm what we already believe. In our better moments, we are aware of this tendency and try to correct for it by creating political institutions that confront us with the opinions of others, by following social conventions that generate exchanges of views, by forcing ourselves to hear someone out, by having friends from different backgrounds, or by reading a surprising book. And again, this is another aspect of social media, right?
Yeah.
Where you fall into these reinforcing algorithms that put you in touch with like-minded people.
Yeah.
That you perpetuate. It perpetuates all these views that you share with these people, and that's specifically how they know what your fears are and how best to manipulate you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a problem that's getting worse as different groups splinter into more like-minded social media.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's been a difficult
Yeah, it's
thing to grapple with.
and the whole idea that it's supposed to connect us.
Yeah.
And it's really dividing us, and,
Yeah.
and we're becoming disconnected. Right.
Yeah.
It's not readily apparent until you start and think about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So confirmation bias, he says, is an easy scam for a brain hack. He says the program simply follows where you click and nudges us along. It supplies more of the same, attaching a bit more emotional content. It keeps our eyes on the screen while making us narrow-minded and sure of ourselves. Everything we feel turns out to be true and important. This gets worse as search engines merge with AI text generators. What we need is warm silence, wrote Simon Weil. What we get is icy tumult. The cold stream of manipulation erodes us into caricatures of ourselves. Confirmation bias is the third brain hack. It's I don't know. It just makes me think how much more we need to interact with each other face to face, share these neurons, right?
Yeah.
And come to see each other in different ways, really. You know?
And be exposed to different opinions,
Absolutely.
which is,
Yeah.
getting more challenging by the day.
Sure. I think it is. You're absolutely right. But I've always been one that, for whatever reason, found myself in different circles.
Yeah.
Right. Guys I work with are very different. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're not very different. They have different interests.
Yeah.
Right. Different interests than people that I would be sitting next to at a school committee meeting. Right.
Yeah.
I serve on some boards and things like that. There's a altogether separate interests by those people, and I credit my mom, I guess, as to how I go about interacting with people. She used to always say things like, "There, but by the grace of God, go I," right?
Yep.
And you never judge a person till you walk a mile in their moccasins, right? And there was no, when my mom was around, there was no other option.
Yeah.
That's how it was.
Yeah.
And I'd watch her interact with people at the grocery store or the bank, and it always took longer than it needed to.
Yep.
But she was able to really make an impact, I think, in people's lives day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I digress. But
Yeah.
that's what it makes me think of.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I just wanted to touch on this one other piece on the confirmation bias. And it says, for us, the experience of having our brains hacked is emotional and political. Even as our emotions hollow and our politics narrow, our opinions, showered upon us, must be correct. Our feelings, repeatedly reinforced, become obsessive. We grow unshakably certain on matters about which we have zero knowledge. We come to believe that people who think differently are malicious. Our prejudices confirm when our social media nemesis doses us with fear, begins to harden, right? We control them until we feel attacked. Social media regularly provide a splash of offense and violation, even when nothing has actually happened. We are sure that we are the victims right now, in the future, in the past, always. My tribe never did anything wrong. They are the real racists. It's only my side that suppresses. They are the real racists. It was not my side that suppressed the vote. It must have been the other side that stole the election. Our fears are cultivated to conform to what others in our categories fear. If you are a middle-aged white male and you fear exactly what other middle-aged white males fear, you have been had. When your fears are predictable, then so are you, which means that you and your digital demographic are ripe for manipulation. When you are predictable, you predictably bring your country down. And I particularly like the fact that he goes right after the middle-aged white guys, because he himself is a middle-aged white guy, right? And I remember I was listening to, I think it was Scott Galloway, talking about. It was Independent American. I can't remember his name, but he runs a podcast. He runs organizations for veterans. I might think of it. Independent American's a podcast. But he was talking about the fact that Kamala Harris, wasn't able to become president, and his response to that was basically like, yeah, no kidding, because I'm a middle-aged white guy, and I know how middle-aged white guys talk about other demographics, right? That just is what it is, you know, and that's something else I think that we really aren't coming to terms with,
No,
Yeah, how do we see others again, right?
Yeah, I think that's been, in this post-election, because I didn't do it in my intro. I chair the Democratic Town Committee in town, so obviously, Democrat, been involved in politics for a couple of years now. That's been one of the things I've been trying to grapple with is, it's easy to say that the election was won or lost on the price of eggs or whatever it is, but it feels like it was deeper. And
for sure.
And to have it be this sort of othering. The question is the country ready to elect a woman or a woman of color or person? Like it's those have lingered, and I'm still not sure how to. I guess after running two women against the same individual,
right,
and losing both times, it's funny to face that.
Yeah, I mean, the argument could be made that certainly, if Biden had removed himself sooner, right, and given us a chance to have a real primary or give the country, not us, to have make a more informed choice. Right? So whatever that aside, no, there's some stuff that we haven't really fully grappled with. We tend to turn away from some of these things that we know are there.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean that, doesn't mean anything other than it's just part of our history, and and these things linger in how we look at each other. And the more we associate with different types of people and challenge the way we see ourselves in the world, we're going to be better off. But that's the work that needs to be done, I think.
Yeah.
So the next chapter he gets, is mobility. And how important that is in our freedom. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm thinking through. Was this where he focused on the Ukraine situation?
I'm not sure. I know he talks a lot about it in Germany, with the Nazis and stuff, and how they allowed for a little bit of mobilization. And they got the trains running or whatever, but it wasn't the kind of mobility that you actually have when you're making choices within for your own freedom. Right. So it's again a negative idea of removing the obstacle. That would and in the Nazis' case, obviously they perceived the Jews to be the obstacle, right? And they made them others. And then, and by doing so successfully, they were able to advance their really evil cause, right?
And it was, by limiting mobility here, it was a sort of controlling your ability to observe other situations. So
and to interact with
other people. And so structuring that. It's funny to think of this in a digital world now. When you look at, and I think I'm breaking off of his subject, but countries like China, where it's you don't get to see how other people live,
right? And
that is part of the control, the restricting of freedom.
Whereas,
you may be free to move within the country or visit some other places, but when you're even interacting with social media, watching state media, it's you see what they want you to see. You're not able to get out, interact with others, explore, move around.
And even like the economic mobility as well. When people that statistically speaking, if you if you are raised from lesser means, it's statistically probable that your children will be in a similar circumstance, whatever, as they come into their adulthood, right? That's just something statistically speaking, that's how it kind of shakes out, And that's just another way to look at our, eventually I'd like to get into talking about our economy and some of the constructs that we all seem to view it with, and maybe look at, question some of those, right? Is it serving us?
Yeah.
Is it in its current form serving us,
Yeah.
right? So that's another topic altogether. I feel like we plowed through mobility. There's obviously a lot more there to think
I
about.
know, and I didn't have as much to take away from that chapter. I don't know about you, but yeah.
I just, in the essence of trying to, make this flow a little bit and get it all in, I'd like to move on to factuality. And the idea, as I mentioned in my introduction, we can't seem to land on verifiable facts.
Yeah.
That, to me, is disturbing, right?
Yeah.
That, we have a president whose campaign was predicated on a verifiable falsehood,
Yeah.
And what does that mean for us? What does that mean? How does that affect us? How does it affect the rule of law? How does it affect what we accept? You know what I mean? Like that. Those are the questions I have when it comes to things like this. And where does it? If what I, and I would hold that fact up for anyone to contest. Right? It's an undeniable fact that Trump lost the 2020 election. It went through 60-something court cases.
Yeah.
Where they found zero evidence of outcome determinative fraud, right?
The entire basis of that falsehood was that only the presidential election was manipulated.
Right.
Right. None of the down ballot. It was a wave election.
Yeah.
Yeah. But however, the only one that was, the entire thing was ridiculous from the start.
For sure, right? And so this is what I'm, I want to hear from our elected officials on this.
Yeah.
I want to hear from our, appointed or hired leaders of any kind. I want to come to a point in our community where we can go on the record and say this is true or not true. Like, let's see where we stand on this, because then we can really dig in and ask those who think it's that he actually did win the election. Like I said, this is a very intentional pace here. I'll give anybody a chance to come on and present their evidence. I'll follow up the next week or whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And because I think it's important. I don't know how people can go on as a Republican without addressing this to their constituents.
Yeah.
50% of the people in Whitman didn't want Trump. 45-something, or 45%, and Hanson didn't want Trump.
Yeah.
That's not a mandate of any kind in our community.
Yeah.
So if we have elected officials that, support the president and did in his campaign, I want to hear from them.
Yeah.
I want to hear how they come to look at this issue, and see what they have to say. I don't know if it's going to happen. I've invited Allison Sullivan. She married now.
Almeida.
Last episode I had never heard, but I intend to reach out to others. I think it's important. I think they owe it to their constituents to speak to this. No. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's my take.
No, I know. But this is one that stuck with me. Before the election, I'd written a letter to the editor in the Express with sort of outlining this is what it was like 4 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. And it ended with insisting that he had won the election months later with a riot in the Capitol. General threats to the democracy, and it sort of closed with I've already voted early. I voted for Kamala Harris. Please follow my lead.
Yeah.
And I immediately after the election, didn't feel great about it. I think these first couple of weeks, I feel pretty good about having said my piece when I did.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Not that it helps anything, but
Right.
But it does. I did, plant my flag and say, look, this is what I believe. Why I think this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily want to say I've been proven right, but a couple weeks in, it's definitely going in that direction.
For
There's
sure.
a sort of authoritarian bent to it.
Right. And that's my contention with this notion of factuality is there there are forces at work that are trying to, that are actually formulating misinformation and, flooding the zone, as they would say, right? The fire hose of these, the architects of this administration, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, or whatever, you'll hear them say in like 2019 or early 2020 that Trump was going to contest the election whether he won or not, right?
Yeah.
Like, are we missing that? Like, are we pretending that didn't happen? Like, that's to me, these are the things that we need to discuss.
And we've been polarized in such a way that what used to be the arbiters of truth, the sort of trusted legacy media organizations, the institutions, universities, one by one have been needled at, picked apart, defunded, and it's just now there's at least nearly half of the population that just does not trust the legacy institutions that used to be the place you'd look to for truth.
For sure. And that's, again, that negative freedom, that concept of if the government can only stay out of my life, I'm going to be more free.
Yeah.
How's that going to work out when we rely on some of these institutions to provide aid and or information or to get ahead of these pandemics and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Like these institutions have served us, and not only the institutions but the actual people that work at these departments, right? The notion that they're all somehow in some conspiracy to I don't know, get into our lives and run amok or something. I don't understand it. I really don't get my head around it. I mean, is there waste in government? Of course there is. Of course there is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you should go through with a sledgehammer and just bust everything up. And it doesn't make any sense to me.
And to go back to sort of the spoils system, where it's now you don't want these career bureaucrats, because that's a bad word. But you've got people who've established careers that know how the operations work, how to fight a pandemic, the Tony Fauci's of the world, that this was his career.
Right.
He's the guy you want in charge, who's now been villainized, and he'll be replaced with some political ally that is being rewarded with this government position. Right. It's just not a good way to run complicated systems.
Yeah, and you're already seeing the chaos ensue.
Yeah.
Right? You're already seeing in these different departments, it's pretty alarming. And to your point, in the first 2 weeks, I think we've seen enough to feel validated in how we saw this.
I know in my professional life, my department within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is funded by a federal grant. About 80% of the funds that we get to make sure that natural gas is distributed safely across the Commonwealth comes from the federal government, and that is one of the things that may potentially be paused while they review this all outgoing money process. And it's a reimbursement system, so we're good for a year. But I'm hoping that continues. So continue having engineers around the state with gas companies making sure they're doing the job right.
Yeah. And just the anxiety that creates. Right? And people start you have these career civil servants, right? And they literally dedicate their professions and their livelihoods to doing good work for our citizens.
A colleague of mine just retired after 38 years, and her takeaway was, I felt every day like I was saving lives.
Yeah.
And it's just because you're an engineer making sure they're doing things right, safely.
Testing water.
Right. And just going through this full process. And to do the same job for 38 years, she was in this same position as an engineer. Going out and just doing her job and loving every minute of it.
Yeah, and thank God for those people, right?
It's amazing.
I'd be bored out of my mind.
Right.
It's not, everybody has their own
not for everyone,
strengths and different forms of intelligence that they can bring to our society, and we, to think that we're not comfortable, but we've come to a place where we, like you were saying, like we totally discredit with broad brushes, like these institutions as like wasteful and we need to do away with them, right?
Yeah.
It just seems like we're really shooting ourselves in the foot, and we don't see it. I'm sure we'll see repercussions. I'm sure there'll be backlash, but it's just such a shame that we have to endure this kind of thing.
We have a bird flu outbreak around the country right now that hopefully some of the career people that know how to handle influenza outbreaks are still in the right place.
Right, for sure. Yeah, very alarming, very alarming. And the last virtue of freedom, I guess is what he would say, would be the solidarity, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think this kind of pushes up against the idea of the libertarian viewpoint, right?
Yeah. I was surprised when he went that direction, but it did. He drove the point home.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I hope I hear from some libertarians on some of these comments, because I'd love to talk to them. I have one in particular in mind that I'd really like to have on the show. It's this idea that, it just seems like it all falls into this like free market, Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman kind of like, these people that I mentioned, Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman, they will profess the virtue of selfishness, right?
Yeah.
To the point that it's like, how does that fit into the fabric of our society and how we view each other? When the goal of a corporation is supposedly to maximize profits for the shareholders above all else.
Right, going quarter to quarter,
Right.
making sure you're showing a return. Yeah.
Not creating these private corporations that have lasting value for our country.
Yeah.
It's maximizing these short-term profit goals, right? And obviously we see the effects in just about every facet of our life as to the corporate influence, right?
Yeah, and this was a sort of, the solidarity piece was interesting because it's a, if you think of everybody, for me to win, you have to lose, or everyone is one against the other. It's always net gain, net loss, but not considering it as a society, that there can be a deal that works for both of us, or that kind of a process, which is really how institutions last. It's you have to have these partnerships pull each other up and not one going at each other. Like it's, it kind of counts against that, what was it, Wall Street, greed is good. Gordon Gekko.
Yeah. I think when I think of the solidarity piece, it reminds me of like the wildfires in California.
Yeah.
Right? Where in his first term, Trump had to be reminded that the people in the areas where they're suffering from wildfires, he was withholding aid to California, and his own people. And this one particular woman, she was in an NSA, I think, and she might have been on Pence's staff. I can't think of her name, but she will tell everyone that wants to listen that she had to convince Trump that these were the people who voted for him.
This was Orange County, California. This is a Republican area.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that.
Exactly. So it's and living in a quote unquote blue state.
Yeah.
What the hell happens if we have a hurricane and we need federal aid? You know what I mean? And I know that states like Massachusetts and California actually contribute more than they take.
Yeah.
But just the same, if we have someone, as our president, who is picking and choosing where to send and wants to demolish FEMA and things like that, like how do we, you remember with New Orleans,
Katrina.
Katrina.
Yeah.
In just the kind of poor response at the time from FEMA, right?
Yeah.
Where that really, brought to light how important a healthy, functioning organization needs to be in a situation like that.
Yeah.
And now we're just say we're going to forget about it? Like it doesn't make any sense to me. It's all this linear thinking.
It's all these lessons, we've learned after disasters. Like, it is hard lessons to learn. We're just throwing it away.
Right.
Because it doesn't work in the immediate. It doesn't help me get to the next day.
Right.
It's not even weeks or months out. It's, you see it in the Senate confirmation votes individual senators are policies are being held back until a certain confirmation vote goes through before the next executive order that someone can be outraged about.
Right.
You go through a cycle, and then when it settles down, next confirmation vote, and then Susan Collins up in Maine can be upset again.
Yeah.
But you have to moderate the blowback.
Right.
It's been wild.
It's been wild. It certainly has, and I can't imagine it's going to be getting any less wild.
No.
So, Yeah, I guess we could wrap it up there, Justin. Again, I really appreciate you coming on. Such an important subject, and like I said from before, you're always so thoughtful and prepared. And I know you're a straight shooter, and you tell it like it is. And that's needed and very much appreciated.
I appreciate that, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I appreciate it. Yeah, hope to have you on again.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah. We'll do another book.
Yeah.
All right. That's going to do it for us in this episode of Grounded. We'll be back soon with another segment. Until then, take care. Good luck. Can I do that one again, Ryan? Sorry. I wasn't really prepared to do that. That's going to do it for this. Try again. Sorry. That's going to do it for this episode of Grounded. Again, I'd like to thank Justin for coming down with us and discussing such an important subject. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, best of luck, best of health. Take care.